Hey, welcome back. In today's video I wanted to discuss the easiest classes to start out with in Final Fantasy XIV. Now when it comes down to what race you should pick, well, pick the sexiest race you see. If none are sexy to you, just play the game blindfolded. That's what I sometimes do. Now this is a discussion, or at least a question, that regularly comes through the novice network in the game, which is that giant chat section where new players can talk with supposed mentors. Now I'm in there, and it's because apparently I'm a mentor, although I don't consider myself that. There's a lot of memes about mentors not truly being that good at the game itself to begin with. And I would put myself in that category as well, that when it comes down to rotation guides and stuff like that, many people have that down to a science, which I'm not really that knowledgeable about the numbers that you can do with any class and to get the maximum numbers of damage, etc. going on there. But this video itself will be about what classes you might want to start out with, because many new players are like, well, should I play this class? Should I play Summoner? Should I play Black Mage? Or should I play Red Mage eventually? Or with DPS? They can ask all these questions with tanks even. So let's just make this all simple here. I got 3 classes that I analyzed for myself, where I was like, would this be the easiest for a new player in a particular role that they would be fulfilling? So we got the tanks, the healer and DPS. So the first class will be about the tanks. Now I would suggest, if you want to play a tank, especially in a Realm Reborn, you only have 2 options. You have a gladiator and a marauder that ultimately turn into a paladin and a warrior respectively. So I would suggest a new player, if they want to be a tank, to simply pick between the one of the 2, because it doesn't really matter at low levels what you pick there. They are very similar in their rotations, and the actions, well, they just look different from each other pretty much, and therefore it's more a matter of what class looks the coolest to you. Some people like wielding a big axe in their hands, and others are like, I want to be a knight with a sword and shield. So ultimately it doesn't really matter. But if you have something like, I want to be Dark Knight or I want to be Gunbreaker, well, they are locked behind expansions, so you're going to first have to get to those expansions before you can unlock them. So this is all for a Realm Reborn material, so I would just suggest you go with either the Gladiator or the Marauder. Now personally I would say go with the Gladiator, because that was the first tank I started out with way back in 2014 when learning to tank. So it's really easy. The rotation of tank is very simple, especially in this day and age, where somebody pointed out that at one point we didn't have a tank stance in low level dungeons, and I completely forgot about it, but it was true. It was locked behind your job quests that would happen around level 30 in the game. So from the Satasha dungeon from level 15, you would not even have a tank stance, so you would have to spam certain actions in order to keep the aggro as much as possible on you as the tank, which made your job a lot harder. So now it's so much easier with having the tank stance at level 10, I think. So it doesn't really matter which tank you want to play, so don't worry about that. In this case, when it comes down to tank, ask yourself the question, which of the 2 look the coolest to me, and go with that. It doesn't really matter. Trust me, you don't have to worry about being a bad tank. We all potentially started as a bad tank if we have never played as a tank in any MMO ever. So it's just a matter of learning how to play your role, and over time you get better at it. Now when it comes down to healers, you have one option at first, which is the Conjurer that turns into a White Mage at level 30. Now at level 30, I don't know if they changed this around, but this is how it used to be for many years. What it came down to is that at level 30 you could unlock another healer called the Scholar, which is like an additional class that is tied to the Summoner class itself. And the Summoner class starts out as an Arcanist, if I remember correctly. So if that is still locked at that level, well, basically you only have one option. That is just play Conjurer at the start. And then in endgame, here's where it gets kind of funny and interesting to me personally, is that White Mage seems to be the easiest healing class to play, even at endgame. For the simple fact that all their skills are pretty streamlined. They're pretty straightforward, where it's just about healing over time and massive big heals for the tank if you need to, or for the party itself. With the Scholar and Astrologian, there comes into play some more techniques and tactics that you need to learn over time. But you can do that if you reach those requirements, either level 30 for Scholar and Heaven's Ward for the astrologian or astrologian, however you pronounce that healer name. You need to be in that first expansion to unlock that third healer class anyway. So with the healer, it comes down to ultimately, do you like to be a proactive healer or a sort of reactive healer? Now with that I mean that with the white mage you basically have massive heals that just keep people alive. But if you're a scholar, for example, you work more with shields that prevent damage from happening. So the best way I would think that plays, as far as I've done it in the past at least, when I leveled it up to 70 for now, I might have to go to 80 eventually, is you need to know sort of when big damage comes in from enemies, stuff like that. So if you prepare a shield in advance, it takes away a bunch of the damage that would otherwise hit the tank or the party at large. So you have to think about what's gonna happen. You have to think more about the mechanics, in my personal experience, when you play as a scholar. Now with an astrologian, in the past, since I haven't played this one in many years, I'm gonna be very honest, but in the past when it was still Heavensward, the fun part about astrologian was having these cards that gives buffs to DPS or tanks. Or to even to healers perhaps, I don't know actually. I never really focused on that, to be honest. I just focused on giving cards to DPS whenever I got them, or for the tank to give them more defense. But the thing is that over time, you know, this has kind of shifted around. It's still the case where you have cards to give buffs to players. So the astrologian is more like a buff healer, you could say. It provides some support to the party while you're also focused on healing. So it is already a little more complicated and more as expected from you. So I think when it comes down as a healer class, ultimately, when you are a high enough level where you can have all the three healers, again, it becomes a matter of you just playing all three of them. Don't be scared of that, just experiment with that. If you're too scared to get into a high level dungeon straight away with the scholar or the astrologian when you unlock it, you can simply start with low level dungeons just to kind of get a hang of the rotations and what everything does, without having to fear that your whole party dies because you didn't understand what everything did once you unlocked it. Because when you unlock it at level, well, whatever it is, level 30, the astrologian, or 50, I don't remember, sorry about that, but you have a bunch of skills basically where you have to kind of figure out what does this all do. So ultimately it again becomes a matter of, well, do you like to heal with big heals and in an easy streamlined way, then keep staying with white mage. But if you want to be more tactical about your healing and feel a little bit more, you know, pressure and responsibility in what you need to do throughout a dungeon run, then you can either pick the scholar or astrologian. But since this is a Realm Reborn guide, you won't even have to really worry about it unless it's scholar, but it's a level 30. So again, with white mage, conjurer, you learn all the basics, so don't worry about what healer you want to play either. Just go with that they give you at the start. Now when it comes down to DPS, alright, I really thought about this very carefully. What is the easiest DPS to start out with for anyone that has never played an MMO, for example, or at least this game? I think personally the easiest would be the archer that turns into a bard. Now the only reason why I say that is because of what I've played with it myself. It is not necessarily a complicated class. It ultimately is a support kind of class where you can give some buffs to your teammates at times, and you keep up your dots damage over time, attacks on the enemies to keep doing damage, and other than that you're basically going through a rotation of shooting your arrows. Now the reason why I say it's the easiest is because it doesn't have any positionals. At least I've never known about particular positionals. If there are positionals, well then I have totally forgotten about that. But the thing with positionals in this game is that they demand that you attack the enemy from a certain angle. So if you go to certain other DPS classes, not all of them, but other ones, they have so-called positionals. So you need to be in a specific spot before or in order to do the most damage. So if you go to a pugilist as DPS that turns into a monk, it has many attacks that need to be happened from the rear side of the enemy or the flank. If you don't do that, well, you technically do less damage, which is a bad thing overall. If you look at the Dragoon, the Lancer, well, he has also positionals eventually at some higher levels or higher skill levels. I looked it over again and I noticed, because I hadn't played it in a couple years, that some skills were removed again. Ever since Shadowbringers. Never noticed that because I'm only now in the final last few months of Shadowbringers leveling up everything I have to level 80 just for fun. But it doesn't mean that I seriously would play them long term. I just do it because it gives me something to do until the new expansion releases pretty much, because otherwise the game gets kind of, you know, boring in the last few months. Of your end game, you don't really have a lot to do. So if you look at these DPS classes, I personally think Archer would be the easiest to get into, at least to, you know, play some DPS and not worry about instantly messing up your positionals. Because as a new player, I know people can give you slack and they can be like, okay, you're a new player, you probably don't know about the positionals net, or you didn't really read the action descriptions in much depth, so you're not aware of these positionals, so you mess it up because you're a new player. Some people might give you some slack, but there will also be players out there, and it's just the way it is, that are gonna be kind of annoyed by that, and they might get a little upset with you, or perhaps, you know, start pointing that out to you, and you might suddenly feel bad, and you're like, oh my god, I did something terribly wrong. These people, they're upset with me. Or I've seen it in dungeon runs many times where people will be like, don't tell me how to play. And it's like, I'm like reading that, right? Don't tell me how to play. And I'm just thinking in my mind, well, technically you're not playing in the right way, but, you know, he has a point. I guess you can't say how other people should play technically, but if it's an endgame savage raid where everybody wants to win and has to bring their A game, well, that's when you really need to know, obviously, how you should play your class. But at that point, I assume you already know. So for new players, ultimately, no matter what class you pick, the good news is that you can always change to a different class with the character you're playing as. You just need to visit the particular guild of any class and you can start a quest line that will unlock it for you. Unlike other MMOs where you have to create an entirely new character in order to do it. Ultimately, just remember the golden rule. Just play what you enjoy most. Even if it's tricky at first, you might simply enjoy the additional challenge to playing a certain class. But in the novice network, you can find people worry about what to play a lot of the times. And we always suggest, just play what you enjoy. And if you don't know what you enjoy, try out all the classes as they are available. Some of them won't be available from the start since they are tied to certain expansions, but the main game does allow you to experiment with quite a bunch of classes on its own. Now, a fun story is that way back in 2014, I didn't entirely understand the class system yet, so I literally made a new character thinking that's how I can play something else, only for people to point out to me back then that I could have simply went to a guild on my main character and unlocked the class that way. That was such a cringe, so I ended up deleting my second character. I wasted about 10 hours leveling this entirely new character, while in the end I was doing it all in the wrong way. So that's the beauty and fun part about Final Fantasy XIV, as far as I understood, in comparison to World of Warcraft, for example, where you, it seems, need to create an entirely new character in order to play a different class altogether. Well, with Final Fantasy you can do it all in one character you've made, so it gives you access to everything, which makes it so it's less boring, less frustrating, less grindy overall in the long run. So you don't have to constantly shift characters, you can just do it all at one. This is important to understand for any new players that didn't realize that about this MMO getting into it. So these were just some of my ideas and advice I would give to new players about what classes to pick for every specific job requirement, from the tank, healer, DPS. And other than that, you're free to leave your own thoughts in the comment section below, or any questions you may have concerning the game. Now, with that being said, if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing to receive more Final Fantasy XIV videos on a regular basis. And I'll see you in the next video.